All right, so we're continuing with apologetics, and today we're going to talk about young Earth. Mike asked about this, and like how old is the Earth and all those kind of things. And this is one of those ones where the previous things that we've done are some of the, I don't know, like the more common apologetics things, like did Jesus raise from the dead? There's these spiritual components. But when you go to the church, it's like you don't find a whole lot of Christians that are like, I don't know if he really rose from the dead. Unless you're like in the progressive church now, because they got some weird doctrines. But anyways, most Christians are like, yes, Jesus rose from the dead. We have songs about it. We sang a song today that mentioned the resurrection and that Jesus rose from the dead, right? Most Christians understand the concept of truth. We believe that the Bible is true. And so even though that's this worldview, but now we're going to get to young Earth. And this is one of these ones where I think, hopefully, I may challenge some of your thoughts. Well, maybe hopefully not, because maybe everyone's really grounded, but it may, because this is one of those things where a lot of Christians are like, I don't know exactly what to believe here, or there is so much influence from our education system into this that it shapes the way Christians think. And we have no songs that are like, we praise the Lord for a 6,000-year-old Earth. We don't, that song doesn't exist. So we never sing this topic. So, and it's rarely, if ever, brought up in the church. So here we are. So we are going to talk about the age of the Earth. And how old does the Bible say that we are? And we're going to look at some scripture stuff, and we're going to look at just some scientific evidence to say, what's happening here. So in Genesis 1, verses 1 through 5, we get a pattern established, because in order to go through all of creation, it would be a long read. But there's a pattern that starts here. But it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. This pattern continues on for 6 more days, and then God rests on the 7th day. We're all pretty familiar with that. We may not be able to name exactly which creation thing goes with which day, but we know, eventually people were made we got that one, 6th day, right? People, we were last. So, but this verse starts off with an interesting thing. It says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. And some people get a little caught up on that, like, what does that actually mean? And I thought that this was going to be more complicated than it really is. But if you look that up in the original Hebrew, that just says that the earth was worthless and empty, would actually be what that is. So it's just saying, like, there was no value to creation at this point. God began creation, but at the beginning, when he put out the heavens and the earth, because there was nothing in them, they were worthless and they were void. And it wasn't until the other acts of creation started happening is what actually gives it purpose. This actually is kind of an important point, not specifically for understanding how old the earth is, but to understand that what brings meaning and value to the earth is actually the act of God's creation, what he put on it. The earth itself isn't valuable without God's creation on it. So he's the one that instills value to things. But anyways, we have this pattern that within 7 days, God creates the earth, and we'll get to a little bit about what that means and everything that's on it. But the only way that we could truly determine the age of the earth would be if we had a witness account from the beginning of the earth until now. And the actual answer to that is we do have a witness of that. If we take the God of the Bible, he has actually given us a specific history beginning with the 6 days of creation, followed by detailed genealogies that allow us to determine when the universe actually began. We've probably all read the first part of Matthew or these sections in Leviticus or Numbers. Oh my gosh, Numbers. and we get into these detailed genealogies of things. There's genealogies in Genesis. There's genealogies in Exodus. There's genealogies in lots of them in Numbers. They're in Leviticus. Then we're like, oh, finally I got out of the Old Testament. And Matthew, right off the bat, starts off with the genealogy of Jesus. In Matthew 1:17, it summarizes some of the genealogies. And it says, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David until the captivity in Babylon are 14 generations. And from the captivity in Babylon until the Christ are 14 generations. God likes symmetry, right? So that gives us, and this doesn't, because we don't know how long generations are, and they're kind of arbitrary. You could get an estimate off of this going back to Abraham. But if you read the whole thing, they actually have like how long people lived, at what time did they give birth. You would have to do significant math. But if you do, and you were to do all the math, we can actually go all the way back and get a pretty precise number to Cain. It becomes a little trickier with Adam. We know how long he lived. We know at what age he gave birth to Cain, but what we don't know is, was there time that he was in the garden before the fall that didn't count towards his aging process or not? And some people go back. But I'm going to say, I don't think he spent that long in the garden with Eve before they had kids. Part of their mandate from God was to go forth and multiply, was to fill the earth and subdue it. And so I don't think that they were like, well, let's take a few millennia and hang out here before we decide to send him, throw this thing all out of whack. Like, I don't think that's how it happened. I think it came pretty close. So I think we can get, I would say within a few years, even if you wanted to go like wild and say even with a few hundred, like 100 years, we can come up with a number that I'm satisfied with. And so based on the history, the beginning of the earth and everything in it would be about 6,000 years ago. Technically, 6,027. Well, if you calculate it down to where we believe Adam, if he spent 0 days, like he was created and then sinned, and we don't know that time, then it would be 4,004 years from 0 AD going backwards. And then we have 2023 going forward. So you end up with 6,027 years. I did not do that math. Thankfully, somebody else on the interwebs did that math for me. And I'm trusting them. But I know it's around there anyways. So that there gives us about, and I don't know why I did 4,000 when it's actually 4,004. I don't know why I put about. I could have just wrote 4,004. But so that's based on this history. So we have, and 6 days. So there you go. Well, and whatever days we are into this year. Like I said, plus or minus a few years. Right? So, but we're definitely a far ways away from where people in school learn. Like, this is not even close. In fact, I'm pretty happy if someone just says, I think it's less than 10,000 years old. Like, I'll give you 4,000 years to play with. But we just know that it's considered a young earth. This is considered young. If anyone in here was this old, they'd be considered old. But for the earth, we call this young. Now, there are two different views that have got their ways into the church. One of them I think is a good view. And the other one, I want to challenge you if you have this view. In fact, I just heard someone yesterday who apparently has this view, and I didn't say anything about it because it just wasn't appropriate where it was. But there are two theories about the creation of the earth in the 7 days. One is called age day, and the other one is called literal day. In an age day view, what they do is they say every day of creation was actually an age. So like when the animals were created, it was like the age of the animals. And then like when the plants and stuff, there was like an age when there were only plants on the earth. And then there was an age where there was only fish. And then there was an age where there was only animals. Then finally the age of man came. We're in that age now. In doing that, what has happened is, people get, and they'll justify this with scripture. God says, well, a day in the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. So time is different to God and stuff like that. Yeah. The problem with this is what you're trying to do is cling to faulty science that the world has given to us and intermarry that into our religious views and our thoughts of the Bible being true. So we say, how can the Bible be true plus also all the stuff that I've learned and true? And so we do these gymnastics to come up with this, and we come up with this theory called the age day. Every day is actually an age. And I want to challenge you that if you have that as your thought, if you are like, well, you're sure, God created, that doesn't line up with science in any way. And it also doesn't line up with the Bible in any way. And in fact, what you end up with is being in the least stable position of both camps, because it doesn't work out to have like the ages line up with the different ways that creation happened, according to the science views, which I think are erroneous anyways. And obviously it doesn't line up with what God is saying. Literal day view, which is what I believe, that it says that in one day God created whatever it was he created, and then the next day he went on his thing, is a 24-hour period. Literal day view of creation has only one problem. Whenever I hear people go, aha, but here's an issue. This is what they always say. How did God track the days before the sun? Because how could you have a day when our day is measured by our rotation of where the earth faces the sun? And the sun was not created until the fourth day. So how could you have day and night? And it says on each one, and it was, in the evening came, it was night, and then the day was over, and that was the third day. That was fourth day is not a problem because the sun's created. Well, that's kind of in the same thinking that Galileo took on with the church when he was like, I don't think that the universe revolves around the earth. And they are like, okay, you're out of the church. I don't think that when God established time, that he did that based on how fast the earth revolves. I think he made the earth revolve how fast according to the time he created. That God had already determined how long time was before creation. In fact, at the beginning, on day one, when it says this is day one, and he says he called this a day, he had established time. Now, God exists outside of time, but in order for him to be able to relate to us and to give us days and seasons and times and things like that, he would have to create something that we could understand and relate to. And it says in Genesis 1:14, this is where God actually puts the sun in place. It says, then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and for years. He's actually saying, I created the universe in a way, so like the stars, these lights that are in the sky at night, show a season. And how do we track the seasons? Well, now we just use, Google Calendar. But how did we track seasons before? Yeah, celestial body. We would look up in the sky and go, oh, look, this constellation, this constellation, this constellation, that's the winter sky. When these constellations appear, that's the fall sky. When these constellations appear, right? God set that up all the way back in Genesis. This was set up. And I think the same thing when it says that's for seasons, and then it says, and for days. So God put a timer in the sky so that we could mark how long days are. So it wasn't that he set up the days around the sun. It was that he set up the sun, the rotation of the planets, the constellation, everything around what he had already established. He put them as signs for something he had already created. So that answers that question. The other reason that I believe in the literal day view is the word here for days, where he says, let them be in the heavens as signs for seasons and for days and for years. That word days is yom in Hebrew. And so he's specifically talking about the length of a day, and he's using the word day for yom. And if you go back to any of the creation days where it says, and this was the fourth day and this was the third day, the word day there is the same word, yom. So he's talking about a 24-hour period of time. And yes, God exists outside of time, but he did that for us so that we have a measurement where we can talk and communicate and understand things, in a way. It would be very difficult for us to say when something is going to happen if we have no concept of time. So God established that early on. All right. So why is there so much disagreement on how old the earth is if the Bible actually puts it out there and says, this is how old the earth is? Why is there so much disagreement? Well, in 1654, the Archbishop James Ussher of Ireland is actually the guy who did all the math from the Bible, and he offered the date of creation as being 4004 BC. By the way, I think it's kind of appropriate that we're talking about this today, because does anyone know what today's the end of? Rosh Hashanah. Do you know what Rosh Hashanah is? Rosh Hashanah, it stands for three things. It is the Jewish New Year. But the reason they claim that it's the start of the Jewish New Year is they say that this is the date that God created the universe. So this is the first day of creation. It's at least the celebration of it. I don't know if they got it right or not. They also say it's also in remembrance of the breathing of life into Adam and Eve, which should technically be 6 days later. But then again, the Jewish people celebrate holidays for long periods of time, so maybe that works. But anyways, it's the creation of the universe. So happy Rosh Hashanah. But anyways, this Archbishop James Ussher, he said in 1654 that the earth was created in 4004 BC. And up until 1654, and much later than that, that was just like the standard. That's what people believe. They didn't know the exact day. So he was like, I'm going to calculate it. But everyone believed that the earth was that old. There was never a time prior to 1654. So for 1,654 years since Christ and all the time before that, everyone was just accepted that this is how old the earth is. In 1788, a scientist named Hutton first suggested that the earth would be 4.5 billion years old. And so so it wasn't until 1788 is the first time that anyone even suggested that. Well, that theory went out there and everyone was like, this guy is mad. Like, did not take him seriously. His work was there. They didn't ban it or burn it or whatever, so you can still find it. But no one took it seriously until about 1908. And in 1908, they started actually looking at in seriousness. So you're talking about, within just like a couple generations ago is the first time that people even took seriously that we had an old earth as opposed to a young earth, an earth that would have exceeded 10,000 years and actually going back to 4.5 billion years. So why? What happened? Well, here's one of the things that happened. This is a statement I make all the time. This is a statement that's true for all science. It's true for everything in life, honestly. But it's that in order to reach a correct conclusion, it requires the right starting point. And so if you decide that you're going to put a foundation of something else down and build on it, eventually you don't reach the right conclusion because you're always building on a faulty argument. And so the Bible is a starting point. And so if you use the Bible as your starting point and you decide to calculate the age of the earth, you're always going to come out to be right around 6,027 years. If you use something else as your starting point, you're going to create something else. And so when people began to reject the Bible in science, and this is where what really happened is people said in the science community that they were not going to accept the Bible as truth, they got a faulty starting point. And they started building all their hypothesis and tests and everything off of a bad starting point. And so you have this very fallible record that you're falling into. So I want to give 7 evidences for a young earth and why I believe that there's significant fault in claiming for an old earth. Now, in doing this, we will sort of teeter back and forth on thoughts of things like evolution and stuff, but that's kind of its own topic. So I'm not going to get too heavy into that. This is specifically about the age of the earth. But the first evidence for a young earth is ocean sediment. So if the sediment has been accumulating on the seafloor for, say, 3 billion years, then the seaboard should be full of sediment several miles deep. Basically, every year, because of erosion, water and wind erode about 20 billion tons of dirt and rock. So debris from continents, basically, the sides of the continents, everything that's under the water, is just stripping that away. About 20 billion tons of rock and dirt gets put into the ocean every year. Most of this material accumulates as loose sediment very near the continents. But the average thickness of these sediments globally over the entire seafloor is about 1,300 feet, which would accumulate, you would accumulate 1,300 feet in about 70,000 years. Now, some people would say, okay, well, that's not evidence for a young Earth because you're saying that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, but you're saying it would take 70,000 years to reach this. Well, true, I'll get to that. But also, if it was 4.5 billion years old, you're talking, it would be several miles deep of sediment, right? There's just no way. So why the 70,000? Well, that would be making an assumption that when God created the oceans, he started them off sediment free. And I believe that he didn't do that. He started them off with a certain amount of sediment, and then we've just accumulated some since then. That would be like, I'll tell you a quick story. I have neighbors that live 2 houses down from me, and they're a cute couple. They're in their 80s, and I go over there periodically to help them out with stuff. And they got some new furniture, brand new furniture. And they were excited about it, and they wanted to show it to me. But at the same time, they were slightly embarrassed by it. And the reason was they decided to have their daughter pick out their new furniture for them because they wanted to have something that was like hip and modern, in their words. And so they let their daughter pick it out, but it wasn't really their taste. But they were still proud because they got brand new furniture. So they said, come in and see our new furniture. I want to show it to you. So they bring me in, and it's beautiful. I mean, it is beautiful. This hutch, they have a hutch, and they have, cabinetry for their television and coffee tables and end tables. And it's all distressed, right? It looks like Terry's hutch back there. And everyone knows what distressed furniture looks like. Well, they're from a generation where you didn't buy distressed furniture. You bought brand new furniture that looks brand new. So it was so funny because when I come in, they go, this is our TV entertainment center. They go, but I want you to know something. Like, see all this stuff here? It came that way. I promise it's brand new. They did this intentionally. And that was how they were showing me the front. They go around to everything. All these things here, it's new, I promise. And that's how they were showing me their furniture. Well, so we do this, right? We have the ability to produce brand new things that look old. And God created the earth in motion. Sediment's already been accumulating, erosion's already been happening, things that, he created that way, and then it has continued to stay in motion, right? He put those in place. So but there's nothing that would be like 4.5 billion years worth of stuff happening. Everything might be a little bit beyond 6,000, but nothing is like crazy numbers. So if I say it would have taken 70,000 years for the ocean floors to accumulate this way, just to understand, that's because the ocean floors didn't start off spotless. He didn't vacuum it out first and then put the water in, there was stuff happening. Plus, if you have a giant catastrophic event, like say a global flood, that would actually deposit significantly more amounts at a time. And so the more catastrophic events you'd have, the even more sediment you would have. So this evidence actually ends up making sense within the context of the Genesis flood. It does not come in any way make any sense with the idea of slow and gradual geologic evolution. So there's that. Number 2, bent rocks. If you ever go to Arizona, you'll see these formations of rocks where the strata are visible. And they're in these crazy bent formations. Well, in many mountainous areas, you actually have this too. It's just not as pretty as Horseshoe Bend or someplace like that. But you have these rock layers that are thousands of feet thick, that are bent and folded and have no signs of fracturing. Well, that cannot happen if all those layers are laid down separately over hundreds of millions of years. Because what would happen is those rock layers would harden in between, and you can't bend rock. If the Earth's fossil-bearing sedimentary layers were laid down over even say 460 million years, they would simply break. Hardened rock layers are brittle. If you don't believe me, try to bend a slab of concrete and see what happens. If a concrete is still wet, you can shape it. You can actually create curved surfaces and bends and smooth things with concrete if it's wet. But you cannot once it has set. And the same principle applies to sedimentary rock layers. They can't be bent, or they can be bent and folded soon after the sediment is deposited, before the natural cements have had a chance to bind the particles together into hard, brittle rocks. But if it's as evolutionists say that they formed over millions and millions of years, this could not happen, because that's just not how sedimentary layers form. They can't form bent. Dinosaurs. Now, I did an hour-long talk on YouTube a year and a couple weeks ago. So if you really want to see an in-depth thing on dinosaurs, then go watch that on YouTube, because I'm just going to talk about Earth and not like how did dinosaurs fit into the Earth. But dinosaurs create a real problem. Despite what people think, they're actually very problematic for evolutionists and for people who believe that the Earth is very old. If you ask the average layperson how he or she knows that the Earth is millions or even billions of years old, one of the reasons that they will say is, well, dinosaurs. Which almost everybody knows that dinosaurs died off 65 million years ago. And a recent discovery by Dr. Mary Schweitzer, however, has given reason for all but committed evolutionists to actually question this assumption. Now, what is the main reason that everyone believes that dinosaurs died off 65 million years ago? Now, Jurassic Park. Right here. Their byline is an adventure 65 million years in the making. Now, it might be that Jurassic Park got this from some scientists that had come up with something, but the reason that the average person knows this is strictly because of this movie. Because more people have seen this movie than have read textbooks. I'm just gonna say it. And
so do you consider Jurassic Park propaganda?
Ooh. I been put on the spot. I would consider Jurassic Park to be an incredibly entertaining movie full of misinformation. Okay. And in fact, it has very significant misinformation in it that is very anti-biblical, and yet it is extraordinarily entertaining. So, dinosaur fossils and the problems that they create. When a scientist has to answer a question of something they don't know, you have to construct a model to figure it out. And from there, you create a hypothesis to test and confirm your hypothesis or disprove your hypothesis. And these models have always been based upon whatever the scientist's worldview is. In other words, everybody does everything out of your own worldview. And so you'll always treat things out of that worldview. And these scientists have done that out of a worldview that, you know, they have basically accepted evolution and things like that as their worldview. And so they base all of their tests and hypotheses on that. Well, dinosaur fossils are almost always found in bone beds, and they're mixed in with all types of other mammals, reptiles, birds. Some extend for miles, these bone beds. Creationists attribute this to a worldwide flood. Basically, if a bunch of things died at one time and put all their bones together and then, you know, deposited them somewhere, it becomes very easy for creationists and people who believe in the flood to understand this. Evolutionists have to come up with something else. And so they say, well, there was probably at some time a large localized floods in different parts of the world that happened around the same time, like multiple flooding in various areas to accommodate this. Or like maybe rivers violently overflowed their riverbanks, distributing large amounts of sand and earth into similar locations. and then bones were in those areas. But, you have to go through a lot to kind of get all these things happening around the similar time. It's easy for us to go, well, there was the flood. People that argue against the flood for the distribution of bones argue that a worldwide flood would have been too chaotic to leave layers. But what they've actually found when we've done simulations is that if so let's say you take clean sand and you put that into a turbulent situation, it will never leave layers. The sand just sort of stays mixing up. And when it finally settles, it just all settles down. But if you were to take that same water and make it really dirty, introduce like large rocks, sedimentary of different sizes, dirt, maybe throw in some trees, some wood, all kind of stuff, and then do the same model, you actually end up, it deposits layers exactly how the earth is laid out. And so if you do your model and you do a realistic model, it actually exhibits real life world behavior. And so one of these things that people have used for years is that floodwaters were too chaotic to leave the earth in the strata layers that it is. But truth is, it's not. It actually does it exactly perfect. The flood would have lasted for about a year. And the model that is the simplest explanation for bone graveyards and sedimentary layers of the earth is the flood. Those that oppose the flood and the Genesis account have to create far more complex models to account for what happened. One of the principal rules in science is that the simplest explanation is generally the right explanation. Now, it's simple to say God created everything and there was a flood, just like it says in the Bible. But they have a problem with that because they go, that's not simplest because we don't believe in God. So that's why I say your starting point becomes very essential, what you build off of. There's a famous dinosaur fossil dig site in Glendive, Montana, or however you pronounce it, Glendive, where dinosaur remains have been discovered that contain original blood vessels and cells, amongst other proteins. Well, proteins in a very, very well-preserved thing, and only specific proteins, can only last at the most for a few thousand years, but definitely not millions. And yet, here they are. We have dug them up in dinosaur bones. Also at this site, it's really easy to dig up fossils because the ground is very easy to dig up and loose. And so this is like a great place for people to go for their first digs because it's easy. Well, the reason it's easy is because there are plants that have put their roots down and they go past the fossils and they're digging the nutrients out of the ground below. And as it comes up, some of that water leaches into the soil. So it kind of just stays loose and wet. It's easy. Well, the problem with that is if you put bones in an environment where the nutrients are being taken out of the soil and the ground stays wet, after a few thousand years, those bones will have dissolved. They will be gone. And yet, you can go there and go dig up bones that still exist. So it's created a real problem for scientists that these places exist. There are also many other bone fragments and fossils here that belong to non-extinct species, all intermixed in together, which creates a problem because they say that, that they're supposed to have evolved into different things, but yet their bones are all together. Creationists are not surprised by this. Evolutionists really have no explanation for these digs. Now, they'll never publish that, but they have zero explanation for those things. Evolutionists now argue that dinosaurs evolved into birds. Everyone's heard that, right? Where did you hear that from? Jurassic Park. Come on. Why? That's why I say it did have a lot of misinformation in it. Yes, maybe it is propagandist. The reason that they say that this could have happened, that you would have had feathered dinosaurs, is because there are these striations or these like stringy fibers that are found on skin. So like birds have these stringy fibers on the inside of their skin if you pull their skin off. I don't know. I don't go around pulling skin off of birds. So I'm just going to say I'll believe them that their skin has stringy fibers. Well, they have found these similar stringy fibers on dinosaur skin, which also is problematic because we have found dinosaur skin that has still survived. So just throwing that out there. But there's something else that's required to have a feather. That would be a follicle in the bone, like a little hole in the bone where the tip of the feather. Everyone's held a feather, right? They got like a stick on the end, right? That goes into something, just so you know. It's not just the skin, or else it will just fall out. It actually goes into like a little hole in the bone and is stuck there. So they have pitted bones, right? Where the feathers are all stuck into it. Well, none of the dinosaur fossils have we ever gotten from any species have follicles. What's that? Yeah, in the bone. Yeah, we don't find anything else. But anyways, so, but we have found something else. If you take reptile skin from any reptile, of which the dinosaurs were reptilian, and you take a piece of skin and soak it in water for approximately a year, you will it will start to form stringy fibers. What in the world could have soaked a dinosaur skin for a year in water? If just there was an answer in the Bible for that. So, we have these problems. So the general time of death to dust for all physical components in a well-preserved area is about 800,000 years. No more than that. So any remains that we find have to be younger than that. And if they're in good condition, they would have to be significantly younger than that. Now, most people don't realize this, but most fossils, when you find a fossil, is not the actual bone. What it is it's actually that it was in a rock, and the rock sort of formed around it, and it became like a mold. And then the bone dissolves and disappears and leaves behind, like an imprint of it. And that's considered a fossil. Or even, and sometimes you'll have a rock with an impression in it, and that's considered a fossil. Sometimes it's actually acted like a mold. You can break the rock apart and pull out a rock that's in the shape of a bone. And they hold it up and they go, look, it's a bone that we found. It's not really a bone. It's actually rock. If they call it a petrified bone or something, it's actually just rock. It's like lime that formed around it and has made it. But occasionally we do find actual bones, which is a problem because bones can't last for more than 800,000 years. So, and I printed this out, but I can't even read it. So I don't know why I printed it out. But this is a chart. Oh, you can read it on here. So you can just sort of look at it. This is just a sampling of things. But we have found from the Quaternary period, which is 2.6 million years ago, they say, we found woolly mammoth remains with hundreds of partially decayed proteins. But proteins can't last but for 1,000 years. We've got, from 23 million years ago, supposedly, we found a whole and intact salamander mussel. Well, mussels can't last hardly any time at all. We have, you can go through all these things where we have dried skin from an ichthyosaur. We have bacteria that are still alive. We have a scorpion that still has proteins in its exoskeleton, or beard worms with tubes with soft, flexible tissue that are supposedly 630 million years old. These are impossible finds. This can't happen. So I'm going to stop it there. Like I said, if you want to hear more about dinosaurs and how all that fits in, because I will get distracted and just keep going on and on about dinosaurs, the YouTube book, or there's also a book. It's not that big. It's only 100 pages. And it's called Dinosaurs and the Bible. Fantastic book. I highly recommend it. And that will give you all the information you would need to know. Yeah, those are also called hipster worms. No, okay. So, lumberjack worms. Yeah, lumberjack worms. They wear plaid too. So, number 4 evidence for a young Earth is called the faint sun paradox. Has anyone ever heard scientists say the sun is going to burn out, but then they're like, oh, it's going to be in 50 billion years from now? So it's we act fast. There's truth to that. That's actually true. That is actually true. The sun will burn out. We know we can actually measure the rate of decay in the sun. And so there's been, for a long time, astronomers have had a belief that the sun's power comes from fusion of hydrogen into helium deep within the sun's core. Well, we have now got conclusive evidence that that's actually true. The sun is basically a giant hydrogen bomb. As the hydrogen fuses, it changes the composition of the sun's core, gradually increasing the sun's temperature until eventually it would burn out because it would just get so much. Well, if you start to work this backwards, then that means going back in time that the sun would be colder. Well, if you use the same rate of decay that in 50 billion years from now that the sun would actually totally burn out, if you go back 4.5 billion years ago, even 3.5 billion years ago, the sun would actually be below freezing. So according to the laws of hydrogen reaction, the sun can't be more than 10,000 years old, or life could not have been supported on this planet. So there's only a window of time that the temperature of the sun supports life on the earth. And it can only go back about 10,000 years. So that's a problem for evolutionists and for people that believe in the old earth. The earth's magnetic field. The earth is surrounded by a magnetic field that protects living things from solar radiation. Without it, life could not exist. Basically, we get sunburned already. Without the earth's magnetic field, we would just go out and roast. We would just be like, put ourselves on a barbecue and we'd be done. But our magnetic field protects us. That is why scientists are surprised to discover that the magnetic field, we can measure it, is actively wearing down. At the current rate and field, the earth could not be any older than 20,000 years old, or else we wouldn't survive. It wouldn't happen. Several measurements confirm this decay. We began measuring the Earth's magnetic field in 1845, and the total energy stored in the Earth's magnetic field has been decaying at a rate specifically of about 5% per century. And archaeological measurements show that the field was about 40% stronger in AD 1000 than now. The problem is, if it was too strong, it would actually have caused the Earth's radiation not to get through, or the sun's radiation not to get through enough, again, resulting in us freezing to death. And so, recent records of the International Geomagnetic Reference Field, the most accurate that have ever been taken, show a net energy loss of 1.4% in just the past 3 decades. Although I shouldn't say the past 3 decades, because that was from 1970 to 2000. So we've had like 2 more decades since then. But basically what it means is that the field's energy halves every 1,465 years, approximately. So I know that's like a lot of numbers in math, but if you're interested in that, essentially it just means that the Earth's magnetic field cannot be more than 20,000 years old. Carbon-14, or radiocarbon. Carbon-14 is a radioactive form of carbon that scientists use to date fossils. But it decays very quickly. The half-life of carbon is 5,730 years. When I use half-life, does everyone know what I'm meaning by that? If you have 100 grams of a radioactive carbon and carbon-14 decays into carbon-12, they're saying the half-life is how long would it take for half of it to degrade into something else. So if you have something with a half-life of 10 years, and you start at 100%, in 10 years you would have 50%. In 20 years you would have 25%. What did I say? What was I doing 20 years? 10 years? I don't remember now. I lost my math. But in the next period of time, you would only have 1/8 of it. So doing that, they can sort of date things. But there are so many problems with it. If you have a half-life of 5,730 years, then after a few 100,000 years, there should be no carbon-14 ever existent anywhere. And carbon-14 outside of a lab is never made on the Earth. So we shouldn't have any. And yet we use it to discover and date things going back millions of years. Like, this is complete faulty science. In fact, it's so faulty, the scientific community has actually already thrown out carbon-14 dating and now go to other forms of dating. But for the longest period of time, that was their number one proof of how old the earth was. But they themselves have even thrown it out as being so inaccurate. We have DNA, number 7. We have DNA, it's still alive in ancient, I get to use air quotes, bacteria. Not bacteria, ancient. Scientists are surprised to find that the DNA in these bearded earthworms, they're supposed to be 250 million years old. Their DNA is almost exactly the same as the earthworms today. We still have bearded earthworms. So they find these ancient ones that have these bacteria in them. And the bacteria, their DNA hasn't changed any. Well, in the year 2000, scientists claim to have resurrected a bacteria. They call it the Lazarus bacteria. I think it's hilarious that they use a Bible name when they're trying to prove something unbiblical. But they discovered this salt crystal that they dated 250 million years old. And when they pulled the DNA of this bacteria out, it was the same as the bacteria of the same bacteria in modern day. Well, if modern bacteria were the result of 250 million years of evolution, their DNA should be very different from the Lazarus bacteria. In fact, when they talk about evolution, it's like, we started off as, this plasma goo, and then it became single-cell organisms, and then multicellular organisms, and then you evolved into this. Well, the DNA between a single-cell organism and us is significantly different. And every step along the way, the DNA changes significantly from one thing to another. Well, how do you end up with something that's 250 million years old and the DNA is exactly the same as the stuff today? It's almost like as though God created it to be exactly the same. Except it's not 250 million years old because the earth isn't that old. In addition, they were actually surprised to find that the DNA was still intact. DNA normally breaks down incredibly quickly, even in ideal conditions. And even evolutionists agree that DNA in bacterial spores in a dormant state should not last more than 1 million years at most. And so this quandary is very, very difficult for them to understand. However, the discovery of the Lazarus bacteria is not shocking or surprising if we base our expectations on Bible accounts. For instance, Noah's flood likely deposited the salt beds that were home to the bacteria. And if the Lazarus bacteria were only about 4,500 years old, which would be the approximate number of years since the flood, their DNA would be more likely to be intact and similar to modern bacteria. All right, that's the end of the 7 points. Now I wanted to bring up a video from this guy that I watched, thanks to Anthony sent me this. This guy, his name is Dr. James Tour, and this is called The Organic Chemistry Defense of a Young Earth. And Dr. James Tour is a real problem. He's a scientist who got saved when he was 18, and he's a strong believer in young earth, and he's a strong believer. But he is also the leading organic chemist in the world, and not by a little bit. And he's also very proud of that fact. But it has been said of him that if he doesn't understand something, there is no single person alive that could possibly understand it if it relates to organic chemistry. So he is the absolute head of all thought towards organic chemistry, and he believes in a young earth. And he believes in the creation story of the Bible. So this is, if you want to see this video in its entirety, there's a YouTube channel called Daily Dose of Wisdom. And the name of the video is We Have Been Lied to About the Origin of Life. So he said that before evolution could even begin, you have to have a cell. And there has never been a cell ever created in a lab, nor has there ever been one to even come close. We don't even have the faintest idea as to how to do it because of the complexity of a human cell. And so he's trying to come against us to say, like, we, with all of our intelligence, all of our resources, pulling everything together, can't create a cell. How did random chance create this cell? We don't even know how to make the constituents of a cell. And in fact, we keep discovering that cells, every time that we look into trying to create a cell, we get deeper and deeper in it. We just keep finding it's more and more complex than we ever dreamed of. We keep finding that there are even smaller parts within the parts that we thought were the smallest parts. The code to run a cell is a complete mystery. And all of this is actually obvious to every scientist, and every scientist can see this. He says evolution is a house of cards. It is all built upon lies and things that they are telling you you have to believe, but there is zero foundation to it. And at some point, he guarantees that the theory is going to completely topple and fall apart. The way that evolutionists explain it is that there has to be billions of years, basically, in order for all the probabilities to happen for life to come together, you have to have time. In fact, the whole reason why scientists say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old is because the only way that they can justify how evolution could possibly have happened, how life could have come apart from God, is given enough time, these probabilities could happen, because the probabilities are in the astronomical numbers of things happening. So we stretch it out and say the Earth must be just billions and billions of years old. There's even some people now saying possibly trillions of years old. But the problem is time actually becomes a problem when you look at things through organic chemistry. Because in organic chemistry, things have to happen quickly. So on one hand, for the probabilities to occur, you have to have a lot of time. But on the other hand, time is the enemy of organic chemistry. So the chemistry from all the origin of life theories that have ever been proposed, every single one of them, the chemistry does not work. It is all theory because there is zero chemical proof that any of this could have happened. Evolution is going from the simple to the complex, and the changes that would allow for that to happen. But anyone that is for evolution has to be dismissive against every other theory. And Dr. Tor has found that they can't explain all the other theories. They don't want to understand them. So what they do is they just simply dismiss all the contrary voices to them. Or worse, they do extreme attack against those voices. And so most people who are leading scientists, doctors, have the multiple PhDs that are teaching at things, if they come out as creationists, or if they come out and say that they disagree with evolution, even if they don't say that they're biblical or Christians, if they just say they disagree with origin of life as the Big Bang Theory or disagree with evolution, they get canceled. Now, Dr. James Tor, the only reason, and this is why I say he's proud of who he is, he says the only reason they can't cancel me is I'm the only one who even understands all the science. And so he's like, there's a real problem. They can't cancel me because I'm the only one who actually knows this stuff. So they have to allow my work to come. And in fact, right now, he's in the middle of a challenge. He has put out a challenge to the scientific community, and it ends, I forget, it's like October 23rd or something like that he said, I'm going to ask 5 questions of organic chemistry, and if anyone can give me, who doesn't believe in a young Earth, if anyone can answer any one of those 5 questions, he said, I will unpublish all my work and resign. And he said, so far has been silence. And it's a 60-day challenge. It's just about up. So far it's been silent, but he's very confident in his work. If you go out and poll people, or just scientists, people about scientists, 2/3 of the average lay people believe that scientists have already created life somewhere in a lab, some form of living being, not a human or whatever, but they have created life. 1/3 of people believe that scientists have actually created something like advanced, complex, like an animal or a person. Neither is true. Life has never been made in a lab. Now, we have taken components of life and done things like people have heard of test tube babies or Dolly the cloned sheep. But we started with life to make life. Like that doesn't count. Like 2 married people can make life. Not even in a lab. It depends on who you are. But scientists have not, without life, been able to make life. That is a complete false. But most people believe that they have, and that is because of pure propaganda. he says there are 4 classes of compounds. There are amino acids, nucleic acids, saccharides, and lipids. And unfortunately, in the interview I watched, he never got around to the lipids question. But he said, with amino acids, we don't know how to hook them together to create polypeptides, and it only takes 14 days before an amino acid breaks down. So somehow, within billions of years, all the probabilities to create an amino acid had to happen. But then once those amino acids were created, within 14 days, they had to chain together and proceed to their next level of evolution. Not billions of years of chance of this happening. They have 14, I don't know why I put a 4. They have 14 days to do this. Nucleic acids. How do you make RNA? RNA is ribonucleic acid, DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. If we happen to get a strand, which we've never been able to create, you only have 4 hours for it to do its thing before it degrades and is useless. So all of evolution, when it comes to going from RNA to DNA, would have had to have happened within 4 hours, or the organic chemistry doesn't work. But we're trying to say that these things happened over billions or hundreds of millions of years. But the problem is all the chemistry degrades within 4 hours. Saccharides, all disorders in people have been traced back to attaching saccharides incorrectly. And yet we're supposed to assume that we got made by a random chance of them coming together correctly. Longer times only equals more problems. Time hurts, it does not help. RNA, which I said was only 4 hours, is considered the primary path to life in all forms of evolution. But evolutionary chemistry takes significantly longer than degradation chemistry. Everything is degrading faster than the theories of evolution could put them together. The second law of thermodynamics, which everyone says the laws of thermodynamics are the laws that we base all of our scientific premises on. The second law of thermodynamics states that the state of entropy of the entire universe as an isolated system will always increase over time. In other words, everything complex breaks down into the simple. Yet evolution says that the simple forms into the complex, violating the second law of thermodynamics. And we know everything breaks down. Take a house that's in perfect order, perfect condition, and abandon it for 10 years and come back and tell me if it has proceeded to a better state or a worse state. We know that everything falls apart. We have to continually improve and repair and rebuild and do stuff. Otherwise, it falls apart. And yet evolution says if left alone, we'll build up. Makes no sense. There have been 0 Nobel Prizes ever issued for origin of life theories or research or anything related to evolution, origin of life, beginning of the universe. 0 Nobel Prizes because no one has ever actually entered evidence for them. And to get a Nobel Prize in science, you have to have evidence. Can't just put a theory. One of the questions when you get into talks about evolution and young Earth, and I promise I won't go a whole lot longer, but one of the theories that people come up with, or questions people have is, well, who made God? Or what existed before God? First of all, Psalm 92 says that God is eternal amidst a whole myriad of other verses. But he's immaterial, he is spirit. So in any theory of origin, something concrete had to have existed, or else nothing would exist now, right? So in the Big Bang Theory, they always have 2 molecules or 2 atoms or 2 quarks or whatever things that they want to say at the given moment, had the energy of the entire universe in them, and they collided and exploded, and then the universe formed out of that. But those 2 particles had to exist. Material had to exist. God gives us an answer to this because he's immaterial. Material things had to be created at some point, but the immaterial doesn't have to be created. So God was not created. He was eternal. And then because he is God and has full power, he was able to speak the material things into existence. So we don't have to say that there was ever anything before God. God just always was. Now, Albert Einstein helped to prove the existence of God, whether he realized it or not, because he proved that things can exist outside of the time-space continuum through his theory of relativity. By showing that we can manipulate time by speed, it proved that even material objects can actually separate from the time-space continuum. He was able to prove through this theory that time travel would be possible by actually removing, not by jumping forward or backward in time, but by actually exiting the time continuum and then reinserting yourself somewhere else. Now, that may sound crazy, but because we proved that, it can show that God can exist outside of time and space. So he doesn't have to have a beginning or an end. And he's not bound by the same laws as things that are bound by time space. So his existence becomes readily plausible. Now, Albert Einstein is considered the greatest scientist of all time. And he basically said that it is possible for God to exist because of the theory of relativity. I want to just real quick hit this and then we'll stop. And this is, does a biblical worldview violate science? Does having a biblical worldview of a young earth, of not being an evolutionist, does it violate science? Radiocarbon dating used by archaeologists to determine the age and remnant of artifacts, they would believe to be thousands of years old, right? So you would use it to date something that would be thousands of years old, but they refuse to use that same kind of dating. Remember how I said radiocarbon dating has a half-life of 5,000 years, so you can't date something with it that's millions of years old. But it is actually accurate to date something that is thousands of years old. Well, they refuse to use that type of dating anytime they find a fossil or a dinosaur remain or rocks that they assume are millions of years old, because radiocarbon dating doesn't work on things that are millions of years old. So they use radioisotope dating, which supposedly works for things that are millions of years old. But if there's nothing millions of years old, we have no way to calibrate that system. So already the science of dating, because there's no way to calibrate it, is completely faulty. So not believing in that does not violate science. Almost all mutations or changes within a species are harmful and not beneficial. Almost all result in death. Yet evolution suggests that beneficial mutations, millions of them, would lead to life. But every mutation that we've had in humans since the beginning of humans has been cancer. And it kills us. So even if you had something that progressed and progressed and progressed, got beneficial mutation, it just happened to happen. At some point, if it had one that was unbeneficial, it would have wiped out and you'd have to start over from the beginning. Like, mutations show us it's wrong. The reason that most scientists are wrong is because of their worldview. And I've stated this a lot, but I feel like it's so important that the foundation from which we form our worldview is so important. It shapes how we can come to correct or incorrect conclusions. Scientists have been wrong thousands of times throughout science, and they're going to be wrong thousands of times more. It's part of the growing of education. Scientists were wrong when they discovered all of a sudden that germs cause sickness. They were wrong when they thought that the universe was only the size of like the Earth to the sun, and the sun was only a few thousand miles away, and stuff. We got all that wrong, and we've learned. They were wrong when they thought that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and Galileo said, maybe we're not. Maybe we're revolving around something else, and lo and behold, we were. They were wrong when they thought that there were only 4 elements, that the elements that make up all of life are earth, wind, fire, and water, right? Well, it turns out we have a whole periodic table of elements. And do you know what? We've added to the periodic table of elements. Like, there's been new additions to it because we've found new things. It turns out scientists are wrong all the time and continually prove themselves wrong. And that's part of growing. That's what's supposed to happen with science. So to believe that scientists may be wrong about something is actually validating science. Secularism prevails in science. And so anytime that something goes against that and brings into it theology or doctrine, it gets dismissed very quickly. And so that's a problem. In Matthew 9:34, Jesus had to deal with people that could not get past their own worldviews. And we also have to deal with scientists that can't get past their own worldviews. In Matthew 9:34, it says, "But the Pharisees said, he casts out demons by the ruler of the demons." They didn't believe that God could be walking on the earth, but here they were witnessing Jesus casting out demons. So they had to come up with a theory and a hypothesis. How is Jesus able to do this? Because he can't be God, right? Their worldview was wrong. He can't be God. So how do you get a demon to leave? A bigger demon tells him to leave. Like, that's the best that they could come up with. In John 10:31 through 33, it says, "Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. And Jesus answered them, 'Many good works I have shown you from my Father. For which of those works do you stone me?' And the Jews answered him, saying, 'For a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God.'" In other words, the Jews are like, yeah, we're not stoning you because you've been healing people, because you've been setting people free, because you've done, we're just, God can't be here with us. Like, that doesn't make sense, so we're going to stone you. I have this chart like here. I'll have it up there. If you're interested in it, you can go online and download the notes because I always have it on there. But essentially what this is people took, just so you understand what this chart is these people that were Christians went and got rocks that they knew exactly how old they were. Like, because they knew a volcano had formed and it created new rocks. And so they went to these different, most of them you'll see are mounts because they're like volcanoes. And so they got a rock. They said, like, we know this rock is 37 years old. Exactly. We know. Or this one is 29 years old. And they took them to evolutionists and said, we found these rocks. We don't know where they came from. Yes, they lied. And they said, we don't know where they came from. Would you date them? And so this is the radioisotope dating that came back on these rocks that they know for sure are these ages. And so you see how faulty science can be. And this is just a sampling of things. But yet this is what people, the second column there, people believe in wholeheartedly. They're like, yes, you tell me that rock is 11 million years old, I believe you, because you did a scientific test on it. Even though they said, like, this rock was 85 years old. Like, I just got it. In 2 Peter 3:3, it says, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts. This thing of scoffers is people that will scoff us for believing what we believe. When we say that we don't believe in evolution, that we believe in a young earth, people will make fun of us. In 2 Peter 2:1, it says, but there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who brought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. I believe that people who try to mix in age-day theory with creationism and say, well, yeah, the Bible's true, but also, we don't know how long creation took. It could have taken 4.5 billion years. Like, I believe that this is these people who are bringing in destructive heresies. So I may be stepping on some toes because I know there's a lot of people in the church who believe in that. And I'm telling you, it's a destructive heresy. It is anti-Bible. If we're going to be Christians, let's believe the Bible. In 2 Peter 3:5-6, it says, for this they willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. To get this in its context, you have to read a lot around it. But essentially what Peter is saying here is that he's prophesying that in the future, people will forget that God made the earth and the heavens. He's prophesying that people will forget that the flood happened. These are the two main tenets of science that they cannot accept. That God exists, he made the heavens and the earth, and the flood happened. We don't realize what a big deal the flood is in the science community, but it is huge. And Peter prophesied that's going to create problems. And lo and behold, here we are. So I hope that either confirms stuff that you already believe or challenge some thinking. Like I said, if you have questions about that, I'm more than happy to discuss it with you further on. But let's go ahead and pray. Father, we just want to give you glory and thanksgiving and honor and praise because you are the God of heaven and earth. You are the one who has created everything. And Lord, we thank you that you gave us record of it, that you've put your truth in your word to allow us to be able to see your handiwork. So God, we just want to exalt you, give you the glory that you are due, and declare that you are the Lord of heaven and earth. And we bless your name. Amen.